Okay, so for this lecture, we are going to be talking about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. This covers Content Standard 10, which by the end of the lessons in this standard, you should be able to analyze how the rise of corporations, heavy industry, mechanized farming, and technological innovations transformed the American economy from agrarian to increasingly urban industrial society. So we're going to be introducing these concepts today in this lecture. First, you have to understand what the Industrial Revolution is. Revolution means a big change. This is a big change in industry. So basically, during this time period, it was a shift from handmade to machine-made products. So we shifted from doing everything by hand, living in the countryside, mostly farming, to machine-made products made in the factories, and most people living in the cities. The time period that the Industrial Revolution took place was about 1877 to approximately 1920. These are not hard dates, it's just a general time period. And when historians are looking and naming this time period, they're looking for several characteristics. These are the characteristics that define the industrial age. So, during this time period of the 1870s to the 1920s, there was a rise of corporations and industry. So people went from working on the farms to working in the cities, rise of big businesses forming instead of small businesses. There was, or crafts, like woodworking or blacksmith and that type of thing, where people just had a simple craft that they did and had a small business in their small villages. Now we have multi-conglomerate corporations and heavy industry. We shifted from farming to factory work. Most people now lived in the city and were working on in the factories rather than living in the countryside and working on farms. And there was an increase in technology and machines that replaced manual labor. So now people were not doing everything by hand, but they were using machines to accomplish the jobs. So focusing on the shift from agrarian to an industrial economy, as I said before the Industrial Revolution, America was a farming society, so they did everything by hand. They lived and were self-sufficient, producing just enough crops for themselves to feed their families, and make it through the winter, being able to raise some livestock in order to have meat to survive, and maybe having a little bit extra that they could sell off at market or trade for necessities that they needed. They definitely did not make a profit from this job, from farming. It was basically just to self-sustain and be able to provide for themselves and their families. However, as there were technological improvements that helped modernize agriculture, we became reliant on mechanized farming or machine farming. Inventions like the combine, the tractor, the steel plow, the planter made it easier and quicker to farm larger areas of land. So farmers either had to now compete, they were competing now with these machines, and farmers that could afford to buy machines to expand their farms. So if they could not afford or did not choose to expand their farms and buy these machines that were pretty expensive to replace the hand labor on their farm, they ended up moving into the city in search of jobs. Also, because machines were now replacing the hand labor on the farms, a lot of farm hands that were hired to work on the farm were fired or laid off. And so because we didn't need them anymore. So they moved to the city in search of work because there was no work on the farm anymore. Also, because we had machines producing and working in the fields and producing crops, it was a lot easier and there was a higher yield of crops being grown. So there was more food available. And this allowed for healthier people. So the birth rates went up. People lived longer, the population started growing, and so many farmers and farm laborers were moving to the city in search of jobs because there just weren't those amount of jobs available on the farm. So during the industrial age, there were so many new inventions that were coming about during this time period that helped modernize our country. So many of these inventions we still use, all of these we still use today in some way, shape, or form. We had steam power, and this started with trains and steamships. There was coal used to power the engines of these ships and trains. They also used coal to power the engines in the machines in the factories, and then that was later replaced by electricity and gasoline. So electricity was a huge invention of the time because now we have all of these new technology that can come out of using electricity, like appliances, and also you had electric heat, you had the light bulb, and we had now light 24 hours a day, which helped to expand the um, you know, businesses were able to now work at nighttime and stay open 24 hours. So there's a third shift. And then you could expand in other businesses that could stay open at night. And there was like increase in sporting events and all of these types of things. The Bessemer process was a cheap way to make steel and turn iron ore into steel. So this was huge for our nation. It helped expand the cities because now we could expand upwards, and that, in addition to the invention of the elevator, made us have skyscrapers where we had 30, 40, 50 floors, etc. There were railroads that were reliant on steel for the track. We had engines being replaced by steel, and bridges and cars being built using steel as their bodies, and even airplanes. So steel is a huge invention, and making it so cheaply and efficiently through the Bessemer process really helped expand the landscape of our society. We also have oil. There was an improvement in the oil refinery, and so we used oil for kerosene to heat and light our homes, and then it was later used in oil was refined to be used as gasoline in engines and in machines and cars and airplanes, you name it. So anything that has a motor is reliant upon oil. We also had railroads. Railroads I just talked about shortly, but with the invention of steel and steam, we were able to provide transportation of resources and goods. We were able to expand the American landscape by connecting cities. So people moved inland if they had a way to get supplies to them, and they had a way to have quick and easy transportation. So railroads, if you think about it, railroads are everywhere. They're interconnected our country. The assembly line really helped improve factory life because it was used in factories to increase mass production. On the assembly line, each person has a specific job, and they are assigned a specific task to build on a product. So nobody is building the same product themselves. It first started in the Ford plants and later was able to expand into the all other factory life. The telegraph, the telephone were both ways to connect over long distances through the use of wire, starting with the telegraph with the Morse code and the tapping, and then the telephone. The phonograph is a record player, which now has evolved to MP3s, but it was a way of communicating and spreading music and culture. And the camera, the first Kodak camera was invented during this time, where obviously we could document and share photographs, and that helped spread culture and information. It also was even used to start the first mug shots and help reduce crime. So as the cities expanded, or as agriculture improved and there was changes in mechanization, and as factories and new inventions were being created and there were factories sprouting up everywhere, our nation became more urbanized. As we industrialized, as our technology improved, we became more urban, meaning that people moved to the cities. So they were moving from the countryside to the cities in search of work. Our population was growing due to more food, better health, and there were floods of immigrants coming in from Europe, Asia, and Latin America to look for jobs. So you could see that the urban centers of the United States were centered here in the northeastern portion of the United States. This is still considered to be the factory base capital of the United States. So we expanded from very, very small businesses to the rise of big business. Our economy is a capitalist economy, which means that we as individuals are in control of the businesses. We determine our own wealth. We decide what businesses we want to open. We decide what we want to make, what we want to sell, and it's kind of up to us to sell it and determine our own wealth and form businesses. The government at this time was laissez-faire, meaning that they were hands off. They did not believe, the people of the United States and the government did not believe that they should have a role on how businesses run, which was a good thing for businesses because the business owners could essentially do what they wanted. There was no rules. They didn't have to follow any regulations on pollution. They didn't have to follow safety codes. They could pay their workers what they want. They could charge for their product, whatever they wanted to. But it was a downfall because children were working, people were working 16, 17, 18 hours a day, 6 days a week. They were making barely any money, maybe $20 a week at most. For a lot of them, there was no safety codes, there was no safety equipment, there was no workman's compensation if you got injured on the job, you didn't have vacation, there was no sick pay. So there were no rules. So it was very business favored, and it favored, laissez-faire favored the big businesses. It did not favor the workers. We no longer have a laissez-faire system today because of all the downfalls that came with that. So before the Civil War, most businesses were individually owned small businesses, but as industrialization continued, corporations started forming. And so this allowed for businesses to grow very powerful. A corporation is a type of business where it's funded on stocks and investments in this from outside buyers. So if you wanted to buy shares of stock and invest your money in a corporation, the corporations could use your money as capital so that they could grow and become more powerful, expand their business, hire more people. But they were able to grow very powerful in a very short amount of time. So many times these corporations became huge big businesses and they formed monopolies. And they took over these smaller businesses by lowering their prices to run their competition out of business or buying them outright. So a monopoly is when one company dominates an industry and eliminates the competition. This is, if you look at the word monopoly, mono means one. So it's one business and they dominate the entire industry. So this would be like Apple being the only cell phone provider, or McDonald's being the only fast food, or Amazon being the only place you could buy products online, Walmart being the only superstore. There's nowhere else you could go to get the products that you wanted. So these are all examples of what a monopoly could be. There were several monopolies during this time period. Monopolies, though, allowed for prices to be increased and the quality to go down because there was no competition, which goes against the foundation of the American government, which is allowing people to have choice and opportunity and open their own businesses and thrive, have the opportunity to thrive. If the competition is constantly being eliminated, this goes against the idea of our capitalist economy. And so eventually, because there were so many negatives that came out of monopolies and so many ill treatments by the monopolistic entrepreneurs towards the workers, monopolies were made illegal by the government. We will be talking more about monopolies this week in the lesson.